Hello, and welcome to the Middle East Forum speaker webinar series and podcast. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We're pleased to have Mr. Diliman Abdulkader, the president of the American Friends for Kurdistan, an independent advocacy and education organization working to advance US-Kurdish relations. Join us to discuss finding peace and stability for the Kurds. Mr. Abdulkader will speak for 15 minutes and open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Diliman Abdulkader.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to the Middle East Forum for this very timely discussion. I'm just going to talk about what the latest developments in Turkey and Iran in regards to the Kurds, and how that affects, at the end, how that affects the Kurdistan region, which is centered in between both these countries. And regarding to Turkey, listen, we can start back from the bombing in Istanbul, which happened mid-November, if you recall, which killed a number of people, injuring over 80, with 80 wounded. And directly after the bombing, the Turkish government under the Erdogan regime blamed the Kurdish people and the PKK for the bombing in Istanbul. But this may have been a false flag operation. If you look back at Turkey's history, they have they're known to blame the Kurds and pull the Kurdish card in order to incite violence between Turks and Kurds, but also allows for the Turkish government to, falsely target the Kurds in regards to military operation. What's going on within Turkey today with the worsening economic situation, with the upcoming elections in June 2023, and the continuous jailing of opposition politicians and political affiliates and journalists. This blaming the Kurds allows Erdogan to shift the blame directly and distract the population of the continuous worsening situation inside Turkey. Directly after the Istanbul bombings, the Erdogan regime conducted an air campaign in northeast Syria. As you may all be aware of, is that the air campaign killed about 11 people, including journalists. Northeast Syria is known to be one of the most stable regions of Syria altogether. It's about 34% of Syrian territory, which holds about 40% of Syrian citizens, and controlling over 80% of Syria's resources, which also includes not only Kurds, but Arabs, Armenians, Christians, Muslims in that part of the region. Erdogan is threatening to destabilize this. He is against a part of Syria that is controlled by the Kurds. And I think this was motive for him to blame the Kurds with the Istanbul bombings. And Northeast Syria also holds positions 900 US service members as well. And this threatens their lives and security there as well. And, Turkey is a NATO member. However, we know that Turkey is not behaving like so. The Turkish goal inside Northeast Syria and, inside Turkey as well, is to literally just go after the Kurds, is to target their identity, is to end the Kurdish government and the Kurdish Arab coalition government that is controlled in northeast Syria. And in order to do this, he requires a military operation. And the Istanbul bombing is a perfect excuse for the Erdogan regime to conduct this. And, if you recall the 2019 invasion of northeast Syria, which was green-lighted by the previous US administration, Erdogan targeted and invaded northeast Syria 30 kilometers deep into the region, but he failed to occupy Kobani, the town of Kobani, which is known for the defeat and the resistance against ISIS in 2014, and which led the United States to support the Kurds there. And the town of Kobani is very symbolic for the Kurds. but the town of Kobani is also the bridge that prevents the two territories that are controlled by the Erdogan regime inside Turkey, bordering along the Turkish border. And that middle part in Kobani prevents Erdogan from connecting the territories he occupies. Because if we look at Turkey's history, we know what Turkey wants to do. We know that what the Erdogan regime wants to do is to basically invade, occupy, and eventually annex and include it, to be included part of Turkish territory. He'll just normalize and Turkify the region, as he has done in northeast Syria along the border, but also in northwest Syria in Afrin, which is 95%, happens to be 95% Kurdish. And all this is, spilling over into Iraqi Kurdistan as well, because Erdogan says he's not against all Kurds. He's only against the PKK, but the Kurds in Iraq are not PKK. He's bombing civilian areas inside the Kurdistan region, which is an internationally autonomous region. And Erdogan is not stopping his military operations and going against not only NATO's principles, but against the United States position in the region, which they're there to fight ISIS, to defeat Daesh. And Erdogan is halting these military operations against ISIS simply because he wants to go after the Kurds. And with that being said, regarding with the Turkish regime, I'll go into what's going on in Iran in regards to the Kurds. 4 months since the protests in Iran, with the killing of Gina Amini. Gina is a Kurdish woman that was killed by the Iranian regime, which sparked the protests that are happening now, that continue to happen today. And what the Iranian regime has done is, similarly to the Turkish regime, has shifted the blame of the protest and has attempted to make this about the Kurds, specifically about the Kurds. The Kurdish population in northwest Iran numbers about 12 to 15 million. And the Kurds have a number of faction of armed groups as well that are not only based in northwest Iran, but also Iraqi Kurdistan as well. But what the unique thing is that the regime has tried to derail the protests and blame the Kurds by targeting Kurdish cities, by cutting the electricity to Kurdish regions in the northwest, by imprisoning Kurdish protesters, by beating them, by even executing them. So they continue to execute the Kurds even after the death of Gina Amini. And the regime is trying to do, ultimately, their goal there is that hey, we're all Iranians. The Kurds are trying to separate from Iran. They're calling the Kurds separatists, and because they want an independent state and whatnot. So this is the same mentality as we see with the Iranian regime, with the Turkish regime, is that blame the Kurds, pull out the Kurdish card, and it's and somehow will bring all, whether it be Turkish with Turkey or Iranian within Iran, will bring all of our those who are protesting against our regime and shift that blame on the Kurds. The Kurds are, however, facing, they're in a difficult position because they're not only facing backlash from the regime in regards to having the protests being blamed on them, but also from the Iranian protesters themselves, because the Kurds don't identify as Iranian. The Kurds are Kurds, their language is Kurdish, they don't speak Farsi, they have a distinct culture, history, dress, you name it. And of course, the Kurds, as with the Kurds in the rest of the region, want autonomy and want eventually independent state, as is their right. However, they're also facing backlash from the Iranian protesters themselves. You'll see that in protests inside Iran. You'll see that protests abroad, whether in Europe or the United States, where Kurds are being targeted by the Iranian protesters who are themselves are against the regime. And the Kurds, naturally will ask, if the regime does fall, the Islamic regime in Iran, how will you be different? Because the Kurdish experience with the Shah's regime previously before the Islamic regime was not much different. Kurds were being executed left and right under the Shah regime, and the Kurds continue to see, these habits, these policies of targeting of Kurds because of their identity. And to this day, it's still sort of taboo to say that Jina Amini was Kurdish by Iranian protesters. So that's kind of another issue that the Kurds are facing, is not only the regime, but also the protesters who are supposed to be on the side of the Kurds as well, because the Kurds are also protesting the regime alongside the Iranian protesters. So I think this puts the Kurds in a much difficult position. It just shows that they don't have many allies in the region. And the Kurdish factions are armed, but they're not influencing the protests as the regime likes people to think so. The majority of the armed factions are based in Iraqi Kurdistan, which have conducted peaceful deals with the government in order for the Kurdish government in Iraq to have better relationships with its neighbor Iran, naturally so. And I think similarly to the Turkish regime, the Iranian regime has threatened a ground invasion and a military operation in Iraq, in the Kurdistan region. So now you have the Kurdistan region, which has the most stability, which is the only part of Kurdistan which has autonomy, is being threatened from both Turkey and Iran. And the United States is based in the Kurdish region. We have a consulate there. We have military personnel there. Many foreign consulates are based in the Kurdistan region. But the Iranian regime sees the KRG, the Kurdistan Regional Government, as aiding and assisting the Kurdish opposition groups who have sought safety in that part of their part of Iraq. So I think the important thing for us to realize is that for the United States, you cannot abandon the Kurds at this moment. The Kurds have a history of being abandoned and betrayed by the United States. I think this is an opportunity in regards to Turkey for the United States to hold its NATO ally, Turkey, accountable. Just because Turkey is a NATO ally, it does not give it permission to conduct military operations and halt the fight against ISIS, just to go after the Kurds. And similarly with the Iranian regime, the United States should not, sacrifice the protest, just because they want to conduct JCPOA talks with the regime. That's not a good trade if you look at it from any perspective. And the Biden administration should not repeat the mistakes of the Obama administration in ignoring the protests, similarly to what the Obama administration did in 2009 with the Green Revolution in Iran. So I think there's an opportunity here for the United States to hold Turkey accountable, implement sanctions, because we know sanctions work against Turkey. Turkey's attitude and Erdogan's attitude will change. And we also know that the JCPOA talks is not enough. It should not continue if the protests are demanding that the protesters themselves are demanding for it to stop. So I think this is a huge opportunity for the United States to show where it stands in the region, and if it does really support the people who are being targeted by these authoritarian regimes. And I'll stop right there. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. So the first, actually, we have two questions similar. David Levine and Barry Werner both want to know, what role, if any, do you see for Israel in assisting the Kurds in their struggle?
Israel has always been a supporter of the Jewish people, and the people of Israel have always been a supporter of the Kurds. If you recall back in 2017, when the Kurds in Iraq held their independence referendum, which passed overwhelmingly by 93%. Israel was the only country in the world to recognize the results of the referendum and to recognize a Kurdish state. With that being said, I think, the position the Kurds are in geographically makes it difficult for the Kurds to, any Kurdish government or any Kurdish political party or armed group to come out in public and say we want Israel's support, simply because Turkey, regardless of the economic partnerships with Israel it has, it's not very friendly to Jewish people and Israel. That's the reality, and we know where the Islamic regime stands in this as well. So I think in the Kurds, unfortunately, the support from Israel is a double-edged sword. I would label it as, just because it's difficult with their position, and they're stateless. They don't have a military or air force that can, that can withstand the threats coming if they said we want Israel's support tomorrow.
Absolutely, thank you. So, are there any allies in the area for the Kurds?
The Kurds have, the Kurds rely on the United States. The Kurds rely on, the European powers to train them, to train the Peshmerga forces, to professionalize their army. In Syria, the Kurds rely on the United States and Germany and France. As far as regional allies, not really. The Assad regime continues to not recognize the Kurds and what they've accomplished, and he continues to threaten that he wants the rest of Syria back, including the Kurdish regions, and he's not interested in peace talks with the Kurds at all. Turkey, we cannot look to Turkey. He's targeting the Kurds within Turkey, but also the Kurds in Iraq and Syria, similarly to Iran. The Kurds have in Syria and to a certain degree in Iraq as well, have conducted peaceful relations with locals, with the different religious groups, with the different ethnicities within these countries. And that's what makes, for example, Northeast Syria successful, is the stability they have created among not only Kurds themselves, but the Arabs, the Christians, the Armenians, the Muslims there. So I think that's what Erdogan is also ultimately afraid of, is that stability the Kurds have created can lead to another autonomous Kurdish region, similarly to Iraqi Kurdistan.
Thank you. Now, you did mention that the U.S. should not abandon the Kurdish people, but are the Kurdish people nervous about that happening, especially what happened in Afghanistan?
Definitely. I think that's the biggest fear, is that the United States can, of course, we understand the U.S. has no appetite for, U.S. presence and U.S. boots on the ground, but the Kurds are not asking the United States to fight for them. The Kurds are not asking U.S. soldiers to do the dirty work. The Kurds all they're asking for is the U.S. presence on the ground with the flags waving, and that is symbolic enough to push back a NATO ally that is, allied with with the United States, like Turkey, and that will prevent, for example, Iran from continuing missile strikes and conducting bombings in Kurdish regions, because they know, these governments and these regimes know that there will be responses from the United States if they are threatened, if the U.S. personnel are threatened. And the Kurds are reliable. The Kurds have conducted successful military operations alongside U.S. military members. The number of ISIS leaders who have been killed or captured, majority is because of the Kurds. Is the intelligence gathering from the Kurds in Iraq and the Kurds in Syria. So I think that's critical. Staying and being alongside the Kurds in the region is an investment for the United States in regards to intelligence and security and stability.
Absolutely. So can you just talk a little bit about what peace and stability would look like for the Kurds in regards to Turkey, in regards to Iran, and just in general as well?
Right. In regards to Turkey, I think the Turkish government cannot solve the Kurdish question inside Turkey with military operations. They've tried to do this for over 4 decades. since the late 70s, since 84, with the founding of the PKK. And it's not been successful. It's been taking the lives over 40,000 individuals on both sides. I think this is not the solution. The solution is peaceful dialogue. It's for the Turkish government. Unfortunately, it's easy to wage peace, but it's not very interested in waging. It's easy to wage war. It's not very interested in waging peace. And I think we've seen that with the countless military operations happening both in Southeast Turkey, where the Kurds are located, and also in Northeast Syria and in Iraqi Kurdistan to a certain extent on a daily basis. So I think in order for the Kurds to find peace and stability, the Turkish government, they have the leverage, they have the upper hand. If they're interested in peace, they can make peace tomorrow, because the Kurds for many times have called for peace. They've called for dialogue with the Erdogan government, but this is not happening. And and I think it's not in the interest of Turkey. I think they don't see, because what does peace look like for having peace with the Kurds? That means you can no longer pull the Kurdish card. That means you can no longer, when you're losing in elections or when your economy is deteriorating, you can no longer conduct military strikes where it brings the population together. And I think that would be a huge loss for an authoritarian government like Erdogan's. And similarly to Iran, I think 100% they're against any kind of autonomous region like Turkey. They fear an autonomous region like the KRG for the Kurds in Iran. So I think that's where the United States can play a role, is that having talks such as like the JCPOA must include human rights violations as well. It shouldn't be just simply based on the nuclear talks. It should be missile strikes, it should be drone strikes, it should be human rights violations, it should be hanging in public of Kurds, of dissidents. Iran is not just made up of Iranians. We have Kurds, we have Ahwazi Arabs, we have Balochis, we have Azeris who are also protesting against the regime. And I think this is important for the United States to realize too.
Thank you. Roger Meyer asks, the Kurds lost to the colonial powers after World War I. Is there any feasible strategy going forward to give the Kurds what they lost in the 1920s?
Great question. The Kurds were promised a state after World War I. It was denied and never happened. And I think what is happening, all the developments on the ground that are happening, is a result of that. We're still paying for that. And the Kurds number 45 to 50 million without a state. I think there's two factors to this. The first is internal. The Kurds have to be united, across all parts of what they call Kurdistan. The Kurds have to have a united force, a central command, a large, a major reason why the referendum ended up being a failure in 2017 was because the Kurds didn't have a central command. The Peshmerga forces were threatened, they were divided. When Kirkuk was invaded, part of the forces fled in 2017 when the Shiites came into the north and took over. So I think that's a major reason that the Kurds don't see that. Unity is key. And second is that they have to translate the military successes on the ground that they've had against ISIS and their enemies, their adversaries, who in most of the time the Kurds are fighting alongside the United States when they're fighting these organizations. They have to translate these military successes into political achievements. What that means is better translating these successes, these military operations, explaining it to members of Congress, explaining it to the administration, because that's what the Kurds are lacking. And that's why, I've created AFK, American Friends of Kurdistan, is to do this, put the Kurdish issue on the table. We don't have access to the president like Turkey does. We don't have access to, like Iran does or whatnot. The Kurds are stateless. They don't have access to these large international bodies. So they have to take all whatever successes they have and translate them into political achievements. And I think if they conduct these two accurately and, precisely, I think they have, it's very possible to create an independent Kurdistan.
Thank you. Robert Larrick asks, as voting members in the UN for universal human rights, supposedly, then don't these states have a responsibility to recognize independent regions or states with human rights within?
They do, but also simply, I mean, Turkey is a perfect example because it hides behind the NATO security bloc. The principles of NATO says democracy. Turkey is not democratic. It allows it allows countries like the United States or countries in the European Union to look the other way because Turkey is simply a NATO partner. And if you look at it from a US perspective, sure, it's not in the interest, because what's going on in Ukraine and the Russian threat and the growing Russian concern in China. It's not in the interest of the US to kind of further divide NATO than Turkey already has by sidelining Turkey or removing Turkey. But if we're to uphold the Human Rights Convention and what the principles of the United Nations and whatnot, absolutely. I think we have to look outside of NATO and all these bilateral partnerships and whatnot, and look at the region for what it is. Look at it, the reality, and accept that who your partners are and who are against you. I think Turkey has moved beyond the United States to a certain degree. Turkey has shifted east, and Turkey's foreign policy has shifted dramatically since the 90s. But the United States continues to look at the Middle East as it was in the 90s, and I think this is not rational. The United States has more friends than it thinks it does in the region, but only if it looks at it from a realistic point of view.
Yes, we have delved into that topic quite a few times. All right, so before we go, can you tell us a little bit more about where we can find some more of your work and specifically the American Friends of Kurdistan?
Yes, please visit AmericanFriendsOfKurdistan.org. We're active here in Washington on Capitol Hill. We work directly with members of Congress, educating them, on these issues as they happen. And we try to prevent the conflicts before they happen. We're trying to, ensure that they understand the situation and explain why sanctioning Turkey is important, why preventing arms sales to Turkey or, whoever it may be, is against, our United States national security interests. And also, I'm very active on Twitter as well. Find me there, and I'm very active. So a lot is going on. So I just encourage you to also, if I were to give a message to the audience, is reach out to your members of Congress and educate them on these issues that are going on, because we are constituents and they will eventually listen to us. It'll make our jobs easier on the Hill as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Thank you again, Mr. Abdulkader, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. For our viewers, please be on the lookout for our weekly webinars offering email coming out over the weekend. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.